Why did the air feel heavier the moment she stepped off the helicopter? It wasn't just the Nevada heat, though that alone pressed against her skin like a solid wall. It was the way 30 pairs of eyes locked onto her at once, sizing her up, weighing her worth before she'd even taken 3 steps. The rotor wash whipped her dark hair across her face, strands sticking to her skin in the dry heat. And already Sarah Martinez could feel the judgment settling on her shoulders like an invisible rucksack. She didn't need an introduction to know the type of men standing before her. Broad shoulders, crew cuts, postures stiff with years of discipline, and dangerous work. The quiet, sharp-eyed ones were Navy SEALs. You could tell by the stillness, the economy of motion, the way they seemed to notice everything. The ones with the smirks and squared jaws? Army Rangers, and those who looked like they could bench press a Humvee without breaking a sweat. Marine Force Recon through and through. And then there was her, 5'6", 135 pounds, calloused hands. Yes, but hands that trembled slightly as she shifted the duffel bag strap against her shoulder. She knew they'd assume it was nerves. It wasn't. The tremor came from the flight itself, from being locked in a metal tube 30,000 feet above the ground with nothing but the roar of the engines and her own mind for company. Memories had a way of finding her in the air, the kind she'd spent 3 years burying, but never deep enough. Well, the voice came from behind her, deep, laced with a Texas drawl, the kind of tone that suggested it was more statement than greeting. Sarah turned and found herself looking up and up at a wall of muscle and smug confidence. His grin didn't reach his eyes. Looks like they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now. The chuckles from the group rolled through her like grit in an open wound. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She'd heard worse. Basic training, advanced medical school, every posting where she was one of the only women in the room. Silence, she'd learned, could be a weapon. The compound went quiet before she could think of a reply, the kind of silence that prickles at the back of your neck, boots straightened, hands shifted instinctively toward gear. A presence was approaching. Jake Morrison stepped out from the main building like a man who'd walked straight off a battlefield and hadn't left it behind. Stories about him had a way of traveling faster than orders. The SEAL commander who had more successful hostage rescues than anyone else in recent memory. The man who could navigate enemy territory like he'd been born there. The one who never left anyone behind. His reputation arrived a split second before he did. And when it landed with weight. His eyes were ice blue, scanning the formation with the precision of a sniper's scope. He wasn't just looking at faces. He was mapping weaknesses, strengths, hesitations, and when his gaze finally locked on Sarah, it was like he was looking through her, stripping away every layer she'd built over the years. Doubts, fears, secrets. Martinez. The way he said it, it wasn't just her name. It was a test, front and center. Her boots crunched against the gravel. Each step loud in the stillness. She stopped in front of him, posture sharp, feeling every eye on her. He circled her slowly, not with the casual curiosity of a man meeting a stranger, but with the focused evaluation of a predator, deciding whether the thing in front of him was prey or competition. "Tell me, Martinez," he said, voice even, "what makes you think you belong here?" The question hung there like smoke, curling into the space between them. This was the first real moment, the one that mattered more than any form she'd signed, any exam she'd passed to get here. She could feel the adrenaline prickling up her spine. She met his eyes and didn't blink. "I don't think I belong here, sir," she said. Steady. "I know I do." A few low snorts rippled through the candidates behind her. But Jake's face didn't change. "Confidence is good, Martinez," he said. "Let's see if you can back it up." He gestured toward the obstacle course, a sprawl of rope climbs, wall traversals, balance beams, and crawling tunnels. The kind of course designed not just to test the body, but to strip the ego gear up. We're starting with a little warm-up. The warm-up turned into an hour of sweat, grit, and barely controlled humiliation. Sarah hit every obstacle like it had personally insulted her, but the flight had left her muscles shaky. Halfway up the 30-foot rope climb, her grip faltered. She slid 6 feet down, rope burn tearing into her palms before she caught herself. The laughter came instantly. Maybe they've got a secretarial position open. Someone called. She didn't answer, just gritted her teeth, reset her grip, and climbed again. But she knew the damage was done. She could feel Morrison's eyes on her, measuring, taking mental notes. When she rang the bell at the top, her time was respectable, but not remarkable. On the way down, the murmurs reached her. Diversity. Higher. She wash out by Friday. Political correctness gone wrong. And then Morrison's voice cut through the chatter. Prove to me you're not just here for the photo op, Martinez. It wasn't the words themselves that hit hardest. It was the echo of the doubt she'd been carrying since she signed up for this program. This wasn't about making statements. It wasn't about breaking barriers. This was about life and death, and whether she could pull her weight when bullets started flying. That night, she lay on her narrow bunk in the barracks, listening to the easy banter of the others. War stories passed like currency. Shared hardships bonded them in a way she couldn't touch through the thin wall. She heard 2 former Rangers placing bets. 3 days. Tops, she's got that deer in the headlights look. First time someone yells at her, she be crying. For Mommy, I give her a week, the other replied. They'll probably give her extra chances before they cut her loose. Sarah clenched her fists under the blanket, feeling the pull of old scar tissue across her back, a reminder no one here knew existed. Under that fabric, 30 names were etched into her skin. Names she carried like a second spine. Names that told the real reason she was here. Tomorrow, she decided, everything would change. What wakes a person before dawn when they don't have to be awake? For Sarah, it wasn't discipline at first. It was restlessness, the kind that wouldn't let her stay in bed while others were sleeping, the kind that reminded her, in quiet whispers, that she had something to prove. 3 weeks later, the woman who had slipped 6 feet down that rope climb was gone. In her place was someone the others didn't quite recognize yet. At 0430 hours, the desert compound was still and cold. The air sharp enough to sting her lungs. Most candidates were still rubbing sleep from their eyes, fumbling into gear for the morning run. Sarah was already halfway through her second mile, her boots pounding the gravel in a rhythm so steady it felt like a metronome in the pre-dawn dark. Her breath came even controlled, each inhale measured, each exhale deliberate. She'd built this pace, night after night, when everyone else thought training was over. It hadn't happened overnight. It wasn't some miraculous leap from weak to strong. Every evening, after the instructors dismissed them, she stayed behind. The compound floodlights dimmed, shadows stretching across the obstacle course. She ran it anyway, in the dark, using only moonlight and memory to guide her through rope climbs, balance beams, and wall traversals. She didn't need eyes to know where each splintered edge or slick patch of gravel was. She lived in the shooting range too. Slow, methodical work at first, adjusting her stance, controlling her breathing, feeling each shot through the trigger, like a pulse in her fingertips. Hours spent until she could punch 3 rounds into the same hole at 300 yards. Her hands, once unreliable, trembling from old ghosts she never named, now moved with precision, stripping down a rifle, reassembling it blindfolded, tying off a field suture with steady fingers, even as sweat ran into her eyes. It didn't go unnoticed. Jake Morrison, high up in the observation tower, leaned on the railing with his arms folded. His eyes tracked her through a complex urban warfare simulation, one of the final big tests before graduation. The scenario was brutal. A hostage rescue in a mock Middle Eastern village. Civilian actors screamed in narrow alleys. Pop-up enemy targets flared into view for barely 2 seconds before vanishing again. Smoke rolled down the street, turning sightlines into a guessing game. Sarah moved through it like water, flowing where the path opened, splitting around obstacles. Her voice over the radio was sharp and precise. "Contact left," she snapped, already dropping to one knee. 2 rounds sent her mass into a target that had barely appeared before it dropped. Behind her, Tony Vasquez, former Marine Raider, built like an iron wall, shook his head. 3 weeks ago, he'd been the loudest voice betting against her. Now, he didn't question her calls. He just followed. And then the simulation went sideways. Marcus Chun, former Army Ranger, linebacker build. Quick trigger. Took a corner too fast. There was a metallic snap, a flash, then the controlled detonation of a tripwire charge. The blast was small enough to be safe, but still violent. Chun went down screaming, shrapnel tearing into his left thigh. The sound of his voice, that raw animal sound of pain, froze half the squad. Training had drilled them for this, but drills are neat, controlled, contained. Real injuries turn the air different, heavier. Sarah didn't freeze. She was already moving, sprinting across 30 yards of open ground while the simulation's enemy fire erupted around her. Smoke grenades rolled across the asphalt, choking the space between buildings. But she didn't slow. She didn't need to see. She'd already mapped this ground in her head. She dropped into cover beside Chun. Blood was already pooling under him, seeping into her gloves before she'd even started. "You're gonna be fine," she said automatically, though her eyes were already calculating. The others hesitated, pinned down. She didn't yell at them, didn't panic. She just slung her rifle across her chest, laid down suppressing fire with short, controlled bursts, and kept her other hand working, tightening a tourniquet around Chun's leg. When 2 enemy actors tried to flank, she pivoted without losing rhythm. 2 clean headshots, bodies dropping in the dust, and went back to stopping the bleeding. "I need covering fire and an extraction route," she said into her radio. Calm, absolute. Even the most seasoned operators in her squad reacted without thinking. Later, Vasquez would admit he forgot she wasn't actually in command. But Chum's bleeding wasn't stopping. Her mind clicked into another gear. The artery was severed, and if she didn't get to it, he'd bleed out before they cleared the village. Her combat knife was in her hand before she thought about it. "Sorry, buddy," she muttered, sterilizing the blade with alcohol from her medkit. She cut into the wound, the metallic tang of blood thick in the air, found the artery, clamped it with a pair of hemostats. Jake's voice crackled low over the instructor. "Channel, Jesus Christ." Where did she learn to do that? The extraction was a dance of fire and motion. Sarah called the squad's moves like a chess player several turns ahead, carrying Chum's weight on her back through the kill house. When they emerged from the smoke, Chum was pale but conscious, alive. His leg, against every odds, was going to make it. The debrief was quiet. No one wanted to be the first to speak. The instructors weren't in the habit of praising. They pointed out mistakes, weak points, what needed fixing. But Jake found himself replaying her every decision like it was instructional footage. Tactical calls, perfect medical intervention, flawless leadership under fire, undeniable. After the others were dismissed, he stopped her. "That wasn't beginner's luck," he said. "That was experience. Where'd you learn it?" She held his gaze, but her eyes. There was a wall there now, something she built since day one. "I've had good teachers," she said. And then, just for a second, her hand twitched toward her back, like she was making sure something hidden under her shirt was still there. The betting pool in the barracks shifted that night. No one was wondering if she'd wash out anymore. The only bets left were whether she'd graduate at the top. Chun, the man whose life she'd just saved, became her loudest defender. "She's the one you want watching your six," he told anyone who'd listen. But Jake's curiosity only grew. Something about her movements was familiar, like a song you've forgotten the words to, but can still hum the melody. And her medical skill? Far beyond standard. Her file didn't add up. One tour as a Navy corpsman in Afghanistan, then out. Gaps in her record. Dates that didn't match. Something had happened overseas. Something that had turned her from a standard medic into whatever she was now. That night, he watched from his office window as she ran laps alone at midnight, as if the dark couldn't touch her. Or maybe as if she was trying to outrun it. He made a mental note. Dig deeper. Sarah Martinez was hiding something. And every instinct he'd honed over 2 decades told him it was something big. The medical bay smelled like antiseptic and something sharper underneath. Something metallic that always made Sarah's skin prickle. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Too bright, too steady, with none of the forgiving shadows you could find out in the field. She'd been through dozens of military physicals, but this one felt different, more invasive. The kind that felt less like a routine check and more like someone quietly verifying whether you were really who you said you were. Overseas deployment clearance meant everything had to be on the record. Blood work, psychological evaluation, dental charts, and, apparently, a complete physical that left no room for privacy. Dr. Patricia Reeves. Tall, silver hair pulled tight, eyes that looked like they'd seen too much, worked down her checklist with clinical precision. She wasn't unkind, but she wasn't here to make small talk either. I need you to remove your shirt for the back examination, she said, without looking up from the clipboard. Her voice was calm, practiced, as though she'd given the instruction 1,000 times. Sarah's fingers froze against the hem of her tactical shirt. For 3 weeks, she'd kept her secret. She'd changed clothes in bathroom stalls, timed her showers for when the others were occupied, turned her back only when she was certain no one was behind her. There was no avoiding it now. Her breath was even, but she felt her pulse in her throat. Slowly, she pulled the shirt over her head and turned. The room seemed to still. Her entire back was inked, not with anything crude or hastily done, but with the precision of a memorial carved into stone. 30 names, etched in a graceful script across her shoulder blades, each framed by a delicate military insignia. Marine Corps eagles, crossed rifles, dog tags rendered so precisely they almost gleamed under the light. At the center of it all, positioned dead over her spine, was a battlefield cross, a rifle planted barrel first in the ground, boots at its base, dog tags hanging from the grip, helmet resting at the top, below it, in sharp military notation. A string of numbers. 345,553 N, 692,075 E. The coordinates Dr. Reeves had seen scars before. She'd seen the quiet memorials people carried on their skin, but she still drew in a quiet, involuntary breath. That's quite a memorial, she said softly, the formality in her voice slipping for just a moment. I'm sorry for your loss, Sarah didn't answer. Not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't trust her voice to come out steady. She'd grown used to the weight of the ink, but never to the way people looked at her when they saw it. The mix of respect and pity. The unspoken recognition that they were looking at someone who had been to a place they couldn't imagine. The door clicked open behind her. Jake Morrison stepped in, a manila folder in his hand, eyes down as he skimmed paperwork. Dr. Reeves. I need to verify some information about Martinez's. The sound of metal on tile, the clipboard clattering to the floor, cut him off. He'd looked up, and his face changed. Not the way it changed when a candidate impressed him. Not the guarded appraisal he usually wore. This was something else. Something personal. His gaze moved across her back, name by name, like he was reading a list of ghosts. And then it stopped, fixed on the coordinates. The color seemed to drain from his face. His hands tightened on the folder. Knuckles pale. Rodriguez, Kim, Thompson, Williams. He spoke them in a low, broken murmur. each name dragging him somewhere far from this fluorescent-lit room, somewhere with dust and blood in the air. When he spoke again, it wasn't to her, not. Really, it was to himself. Cuner Province? Sarah's shoulders stiffened. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. She knew that tone, recognition, and something heavier under it. The weight of a man who'd been carrying the same day inside him. You were there, he said. Not a question. Doctor. Reeves glanced between them, feeling the air shift but not understanding why. I'll give you two some privacy, she said quietly, gathering her things and slipping out without another word. The silence left behind was sharp enough to cut. Sarah turned at last, crossing her arms over her chest. She met his eyes. Eyes that looked older now than they had 3 weeks ago, etched with lines that spoke of sleepless nights and memories that refused to fade. Corporal Sarah Martinez. 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, she said evenly, as if they were meeting for the first time. Though I suppose you never got my name in the official reports. Jake lowered himself into the nearest chair like the strength had gone out of his legs. The folder slid from his grip, landing beside the fallen clipboard with a dull slap. I've carried those 30 names for 3 years, he said, voice unsteady. Every night, I see their faces. I was supposed to save them. I was supposed to get there in time. Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. You saved 4 of us. He looked up sharply. Like the math didn't compute. Rodriguez died in my arms, she continued, her throat tightening. But Williams made it home to his daughter because of you. Chun survived because you pulled him out of that burning Humvee. Morrison, no relation, lived to see his son graduate high school because you carried him to the LZ under fire. Tears welled in his eyes. He didn't blink them away. But 9 didn't make it. 9 Marines died because I was 12 minutes. Too late. No, Sarah said, the word cutting through the air. 9 Marines died because we walked into an ambush, because someone leaked our patrol route, because war is hell, and sometimes good people don't make it home. She stepped closer, but 4 lived. 4 lived because you and your SEAL team risked everything to get us out of that valley. The coordinates on her back told the whole story. The worst day in both their lives, a routine patrol turned into a death trap. RPGs, machine gun fire. The convoy torn apart. She'd spent 4 hours under constant fire, moving from man to man. Keeping them alive was little more than her training and stubborn will. And then his team had arrived. Smoke, gunfire, chaos everywhere. Pulling out the survivors had been a nightmare. They'd taken losses of their own, but they'd made it out. I recommended you for a Silver Star, Jake said finally. But you disappeared, left the course, vanished before the paperwork went through. I never even learned your name. Sarah gave a bitter, humorless laugh. I couldn't stay. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. Every time someone thanked me for my service, I wanted to scream. 30 Marines went out that day. 4 came back. How is that something to be proud of? Because you held the line, he said, standing now, his voice hardening. Because when everything went to hell, you didn't break. You didn't run. You kept them alive until help arrived. That's not failure, Martinez. That's heroism. Her. Eyes shone, but she didn't look away. I left because I couldn't carry the guilt. I spent 3 years trying to convince myself I'd done all I could. And then I realized. Running away wasn't honoring them. It was betraying them. Jake's voice softened. Is that why you're here? To honor them? She nodded. Rodriguez made me promise before he died that I wouldn't let his death be meaningless. That I'd keep fighting. Keep protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. I tried to forget that promise. I couldn't. And just like that, the mystery that had been circling Jake for weeks wasn't a mystery anymore. The skill, the focus, the haunted look in her eyes. Sarah Martinez wasn't here to prove herself to anyone else. She was here to keep a promise. Some hours in the desert night felt quieter than others, as if the air itself was holding its breath. 300 hours was one of those times. From the ground, the compound looked asleep. But on the roof of the barracks, Sarah sat alone, her silhouette etched against a sky scattered with cold, bright stars. Her legs dangled over the edge, boots brushing the corrugated siding beneath her. She didn't feel the bite of the night air. Her thoughts kept her warm enough, or restless enough. Jake Morrison found her there, the crunch of his boots on the rooftop gravel barely audible. He stopped a few paces away. Corporal Martinez. It was the first time he'd used her old rank since Afghanistan. Her shoulders tensed slightly, but she didn't turn. "I wondered if you'd remember," she said, her voice carrying easily through the stillness. "Most people try to forget the worst days of their lives." Jake took a step closer. "You think I could forget 30 names?" "Every mission since then, every after-action report, I carried them. Every time I closed my eyes, there they were." She finally glanced at him over her shoulder, her face pale in the moonlight. "You saved 4 of us." He moved closer, lowering himself onto the ledge beside her. From here, the desert stretched endlessly, a sea of shadow and sand under the stars. "Rodriguez died in my arms," she said quietly. "But Williams made it home to his little girl because of you. Chun survived because you pulled him out of that burning Humvee, Morrison. No relation. Lived to see his son graduate high school because you carried him to the LZ with a bullet in your own shoulder." Jake's eyes flickered at that, the old ache returning. "And 9 didn't make it. 9 Marines who'd be alive if I'd gotten there 12 minutes sooner." Sarah's head shook firm. "If you'd gotten there 12 minutes sooner, you'd have walked right into the same ambush. The Taliban knew our routes. They've been watching for weeks. You saved who you could save, and you did it while taking fire from 3 sides. That's not failure, Jake. That's the job." Silence hung between them, heavy, but not hostile. The kind of silence that comes when 2 people realize they've been carrying the same weight in different ways. "I left my team 6 months after that mission," Jake admitted finally. "Couldn't handle the ghosts. Every time a rescue call came in, I saw your faces in that valley. My CO called it operational fatigue, suggested a desk job. I retired instead, ended up here, training people who'll take missions I can't." Sarah stared out at the horizon. "I left the Corps entirely. Spent 3 years as a paramedic in Detroit. Thought maybe if I traded battlefields for city streets, the nightmares would fade." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "They didn't." Jake studied her profile. The sharp line of her jaw, the stillness in her posture. "What kept you going?" Her answer was a whisper, almost lost to the wind. "Rodriguez." Jake waited. He was dying. "Shrapnel wounds I couldn't fix with what I had. But instead of asking me to tell his family, he loved them. Instead of asking for anything for himself, he made me promise." Her hands twisted in her lap, her knuckles pale. "He told me not to let his death turn me into a victim. Said the best way to honor the dead was to keep living. Keep fighting, protect people who couldn't protect themselves." And then she stopped, her voice catching. He smiled. "Even then, said he knew I was strong enough to carry it." Jake exhaled slowly. "He was right. I didn't feel strong," she said, shaking her head. "I felt terrified. Every second I thought I was going to die, but I couldn't leave them. Chun, Williams, Morrison, when you can't save everyone. You save who you can." Jake's voice was low. "Steady. Is that why you're here? To honor him?" Her gaze lifted to the stars again. "I spent 3 years telling myself I'd done enough. That saving lives as a civilian was enough. But every time I patched someone up on the streets, I heard his voice asking why I was settling. So I applied. Here, not to prove something to anyone else, just to myself, to see if I could still fight the way he believed I could." Jake stood, offering his hand. "You already have." She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. They started toward the stairwell, boots crunching softly on the gravel. Halfway there, Jake stopped. "There's something you need to know about tomorrow's graduation." Her brow furrowed. "What about it?" "I've been authorized to make a special announcement, one that recognizes exceptional performance under pressure and leadership. Potential in the field." She stopped walking. "Jake, there are people here with more experience." "More what?" He interrupted. "More time in service? More medals? More theory? Sarah, you've already led under real fire. You've made life or death calls and brought people home. You can't teach that. You either have it or you don't." Her throat worked, but no words came. "Tomorrow," he said, "the others are going to see what I've been seeing these past weeks." The desert morning had its own kind of quiet, not the peace of still water, but the hush before something breaks open. By 0900 hours, the main briefing room was packed. The air was heavy with heat and a kind of tension that came from weeks of living in close quarters, competing for the same thing. Out of the 30 candidates who had started the program, only 22 remained. Sarah sat in the back row, straight-backed but alert. The rhythmic tap of her boot on the floor was the only sign of the pulse pounding in her ears. Up front, the instructors stood like statues against the wall, arms folded, eyes scanning the room. And then Jake Morrison stepped to the podium. The room went still. He didn't start with a joke or with a smile. He started like he always did. Direct, stripped down, all business. "Over the past 6 weeks," he said, his voice carrying to the back without effort, "you've been tested in ways designed to break the weak and humble the strong. You've been pushed beyond exhaustion. You've been dropped into scenarios that demanded not just skill, but decision-making under fire. You've been asked to work with people you didn't know, trust them with your life, and take responsibility for theirs." A few heads nodded, the kind of nods you give when you've lived through something you can't quite explain. Jake's gaze swept the room. "Most of you will leave here today ready to deploy, but there's one candidate who's demonstrated something beyond competence. One candidate who's shown the kind of leadership that saves lives when bullets start flying." He paused, not for drama, but for weight. His eyes found Sarah in the back row. "Effective immediately," he said. "Sarah Martinez is being promoted to team leader for Alpha Squad's deployment to Eastern Europe." For a moment, the words didn't register. They hung in the air like smoke. Then the room moved. It started with Marcus Chun, the ranger she'd carried out of the kill house. He was on his feet first, his palms cracking together in applause. Then Tony Vasquez, the Marine raider who'd once written her off, followed. Within seconds, the sound filled the room. Even the candidates who had placed bets against her survival were clapping, some out of genuine respect, some perhaps because it was the only move left. Sarah stood slowly, feeling the eyes, the heat, the sound pressing in. Her pulse was loud in her ears. She walked to the front, each step measured, not hurried. Jake reached for the insignia, the silver bar that marked her as a team leader. He didn't smile, but his voice was low enough for only her to hear. Rodriguez would be proud. Her eyes burned, but her voice was steady. They all would be, and for the first time in 3 years. "I think I'm proud too." He pinned the insignia to her uniform with careful precision, then stepped back. To the room, he said, "Leadership isn't about rank or title. It's about keeping your people alive. Martinez has already done that. In the worst circumstances imaginable, I expect you to follow her lead." There was no ceremony beyond that, no music, no pomp, just a nod from Jake. And then the sound of boots on tile as the candidates moved out. Now contractors about to be scattered across missions that wouldn't make the news. But the shift in the room was clear on her way out. Sarah caught the smallest changes in the way people looked at her. Chun's easy grin when he passed her in the hall. Vasquez's curt nod. The kind that meant more than words, even the man. With the Texas drawl who'd made the bottom of the barrel comment on her first day, didn't meet her eyes this time. Back in her quarters, she set the duffel on her bunk and sat for a moment in the quiet. The insignia still felt strange. On her chest, not heavy exactly, but present, like a promise you couldn't take lightly. Through the thin walls, she could hear the others packing, laughing, already shifting into mission mode. For them, this was just the next step. For her, it was something else entirely. Because she knew the truth. The ghost didn't leave. The names didn't fade. The coordinates were still there, etched into her skin. A reminder that leadership wasn't about glory. It was about carrying the weight. She touched the back of her shoulder, fingers finding the edge of the ink through the fabric, and she drew in a slow breath and stood. Her squad would be ready in 30 minutes, and she'd be there, on time, exactly where she was supposed to be. The hum of the transport bay was constant, a blend of hydraulic whines, the metallic clink of gear being checked, and the low murmur of voices that didn't need to be loud to be heard. Sarah stood at the edge of it all, clipboard in hand, watching her squad move like a set of gears inside a machine. They weren't hers yet, not in the way that mattered, but in less than 24 hours, she'd be leading them into the kind of environment where hesitation got people killed. Alpha Squad, 6 operators, each with their own scars, habits, and quiet tells. She'd studied their files until she could recite them from memory. But paper didn't tell you who someone really was under pressure. That would come in the field. Vasquez was checking his rifle for the 3rd time, not because he doubted it, but because he needed the ritual. Chun, limping slightly but cleared, for duty, was running through radio protocols with their comm specialist. Laird, she noticed the way Laird listened, chin tucked, eyes narrowed, not because he didn't trust Chun, but because he needed the order to feel perfect. The mission briefing had been short and cold. Eastern Europe, small town in disputed territory. Intelligence suggested a high-value target was being moved through the area. A man whose network funneled weapons and training to groups that thrived on chaos. The official objective: capture if possible, eliminate if not. The unofficial reality: everything could change in seconds. Her mind kept running through variables, not the heroic kind, the ugly ones. Roads washed out, radios jammed, civilians caught in crossfire, weather that turned their timetable into fiction. She set the clipboard down and started moving through the room, not barking orders, not micromanaging, just checking, asking the right questions. Vasquez, what's your primary route if the main road is blocked? North Ridge, through the quarry, he said without hesitation. Chun, what's the call if our extraction gets pushed 30 minutes? We hold in the southern blockhouses, 2 entry points, defensible positions. Each answer came quick, clean, the way she needed them to. When Jake passed through the bay, he didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. His eyes met hers for a fraction of a second, and she could read the silent message. It's yours now. Later, when the gear checks. We're done, and the hum had faded to quiet. Sarah found herself alone in the ready room. The wall clock ticked loud in the emptiness. She sat, elbows on her knees, letting the weight of it settle. The promotion had felt unreal yesterday. Now it felt heavy enough to anchor her in place. She remembered something an old field sergeant had told her in Afghanistan. The hard part isn't pulling the trigger, it's being the one who told them where to aim. She pulled the small notebook from her cargo pocket. The cover was worn soft from years of writing in gear bags. Inside, the pages were filled with names and details. Not tactical notes, personal ones. The kind of things you couldn't find in a mission file. Chun's daughter's name. The fact that Laird hated coffee, but would drink it anyway if someone else made it. That Vasquez rubbed the back of his neck when he was weighing a choice he didn't like. It wasn't sentimentality. It was survival. The more she knew about her people, the more she could read them when it mattered. She was halfway through adding a new line about their medic, Holly, when she heard boots in the doorway. You're still here, Jake said. She didn't look up right away. So, are you. He stepped inside, leaning on the doorframe. You're going to do fine tomorrow. She shut the notebook. That's not the point. The point is doing more than fine. The point is bringing them all back. He nodded slowly. You know better than most that you can't always control that. Her eyes met his. I can control my part of it. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he pushed off the frame and crossed the room, dropping a folded piece of paper onto the table beside her. Coordinates, he said. Alternate extraction point if things get messy. Don't share unless you have to. She picked up the paper, scanned it, and then tucked it into the notebook. Without comment, as he left, his voice came back over his shoulder. It's different when you're the one at the front, Martinez, but I think you already know that. When she was alone again, she sat back, letting the silence stretch. The old ache in her back, the pull of ink and scar tissue, felt sharper tonight. She ran a hand over it, the way you might check that a keepsake was still in your pocket. Not a burden, not anymore. A promise tomorrow would be the first time she'd carry it into the field in 3 years. The wind in Eastern Europe had teeth, not the desert kind that scoured you with heat, but the cold bite that cut through layers, slipped into seams, and stayed there. The town ahead of them lay under a thin wash of fog. From a distance, it looked abandoned. But Sarah knew better. Windows that seemed empty were eyes. Doors that stayed shut weren't necessarily unoccupied. Alpha Squad moved low along the edge of a cracked road. Gear blending with the winter bare brush, she took point, her breath controlled, her eyes tracking the angles ahead. Each step was deliberate. The mission plan was simple on paper. Intercept a convoy moving their target through the southern end of town. Isolate. Capture if possible. Extract before the local militia decided to turn the place into a war zone. On the ground, simple never stayed simple. Her gums crackled softly in her ear. 2 minutes to contact, Laird's voice said. Quiet but steady. She raised a fist. The squad halted. Melting into the cover of a crumbling stone wall, she scanned the street, mapping every possible path in and out. The convoy could be early, late, or not show at all. Intel had a way of being correct right up until it wasn't. Vasquez, she whispered. Take high ground, north balcony, chun. Laird, cover east and south alleys. Halle, you with me? No one asked questions. No one hesitated. From her position, she could hear the faint rattle of an engine long before headlights cut through the fog. The sound was wrong, too. Irregular, like a vehicle that had been patched up more times than it should have. The lead truck emerged, paint dulled to a matte gray, windows tinted. 2 more followed. Spaced just far enough apart to make a clean stop difficult. Her gut tightened. The target was supposed to be in the middle vehicle. But if she'd learned anything, it was that supposed to meant very little when someone wanted you to. Walk into a trap. Wait for my mark, she said into comms, her tone even. The first truck passed, then the second. Her eyes locked on movement in the back seat. A shape, restrained, head down. Could be him. Could be bait. The third vehicle rolled into view. And that's when she saw it. A glint under the chassis, just visible in the diffused morning light. IED. Hold. Her voice cut through the channel like a wire snapping. Third truck's rigged. Do not engage. The convoy slowed, but not because of them. Something up ahead was blocking the road. She couldn't see what. Vasquez, eyes forward, she ordered. A pause. Then his voice. We've got militia setting up a roadblock 50 meters, looks like they're waiting for someone to make a move. Trap confirmed. Sarah's mind moved fast, flipping through options like flashcards. They couldn't stay in position. Once the militia spotted them, they'd be boxed in. Going loud wasn't an option. Civilians could still be inside these buildings. She tapped her comms. Alpha, we're shifting. North alley, 3 buildings over. Halle, you're on me. They moved in a crouch, keeping low. Boots silent against frost-hardened dirt. The fog helped. Enough cover to break line of sight without losing each other. They reached the alley just as the convoy slowed again, engines idling. Sarah peeked around the corner. The second truck, the one with their supposed target, had stopped under a balcony. Two armed men stepped out, scanning the rooftops. Her pulse ticked faster, but her breathing stayed steady. She could take them, but the IED on the third truck meant someone was ready to blow the whole thing if the fight went wrong. "Chun," she murmured, "you still have a line on the southern alley?" "Affirm." "Good. If they break south, you pin them there. No chase. Just hold them." "Copy." The man in the back seat lifted his head, just for a second, enough for her to see his face through the misted glass. The grainy photos from the briefing had made him look like any other middle-aged man. In person, there was nothing ordinary. His gaze was sharp, calculating. Even with wrists bound, he knew they were here. Before she could give the order, the sound of an engine roared. From the east, another truck, smaller, barreled into the square, tires skidding on the frozen ground. 4 militia jumped out, weapons raised. The convoy guards pivoted, attention shifting. Just enough. "Now," Sarah said. Alpha moved like they'd rehearsed it 100 times. Even though this exact moment was brand new, Vasquez dropped one of the militia from his perch before the man could fire. Laird's rifle cracked twice, sending the others scrambling for cover. Sarah pushed forward, Holly at her back. She reached the second truck as the driver scrambled out. "Hands up." Holly kept him in place while she yanked the rear door open. "Move," she told the target, her tone leaving no room for argument. He didn't resist, but his eyes never left hers. The crack of gunfire behind them made her pivot. The militia from the roadblock had joined the fight, rounds punching into the walls around them. "Alpha, fall back to point 2, she ordered. They moved in controlled bursts, covering, moving, covering again. But the third truck's engine had revved, and that IED was still a wild card in the middle of it all. "Vasquez, keep eyes on that rig," she said. "If anyone heads for the detonator, drop them." They reached the north alley just as another burst of fire chewed through the stone at her shoulder. The target stumbled but stayed upright. When the last of Alpha made it through, Sarah keyed her comm. "We're clear. Move to extraction." "No." One relaxed until they were 2 streets out. Pace quick but not reckless. She kept scanning, listening. The sounds of the firefight faded, replaced by the crunch of boots and the hiss of breath in the cold air. At the extraction point, a battered van idled behind an abandoned warehouse. They loaded in, doors slamming shut. Only then did Sarah let herself exhale. The target sat across from her, wrists still bound. His gaze was unreadable, but she could tell he was cataloging everything about them. Jake's voice came over the secure line as they pulled away. "Status?" "Target secure," she said. "No friendly casualties. We're inbound." There was a pause before he answered. "Copy. Good work, Alpha." She leaned back against the cold metal wall, the vibration of the engine thrumming through her spine. It wasn't relief she felt. Not exactly. It was the knowledge that they'd stepped into something that could have gone very wrong. And they'd walked out intact. But she also knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The flight back was louder than it should have been. Not because anyone was talking. Alpha Squad wasn't big on wasting words after a mission, but because the hum of the transport's engines filled every empty space. It was the kind of sound that left you alone with your thoughts, whether you wanted to be or not. Sarah sat along the port side, helmet resting on her knee, eyes on the shifting gray outside the window. Snow clouds stretched low over the land, the horizon blurring where sky met earth. Across from her, Chum leaned back against the bulkhead. One leg stretched, the other bent, hands clasped loosely. Vasquez sat beside him, eyes closed, jaw tight. Holly checked gear with slow, mechanical movements. His focus narrowed to whatever was in his hands. Laird stared at nothing, No one was smiling. No one needed to. The mission had gone well. No friendly casualties. Target secured. Clean extraction. But Sarah knew what they were all thinking. Any day that ended with everyone still on board was a win. And still, it never felt like enough. She let her gaze drift to the man sitting near the rear. Their target. He hadn't spoken a word since they'd pulled him from the convoy. Hands still bound. Posture relaxed in a way that was almost calculated. He had the kind of presence that didn't need to say much. The kind that lingered even when you weren't looking. She turned back to the window. The glass reflected the faint outline of her own face, shadowed in the cabin light. For a moment, she thought of Rodriguez. Not the way he'd looked in those last minutes, but before, laughing over bad coffee, arguing about music, looking at her like he was certain she'd outlast them all. Her fingers found the back of her shoulder, pressing lightly where the ink lay under the fabric. The names were always there, not just in skin, but in the rhythm of her days. Every decision in the field felt like a conversation with them, a silent roll call to make sure no one else joined their ranks. When they landed, the cold hit like a wall. The wind off the tarmac was sharp, slicing under collars and through seams. Alpha Squad moved as one toward the hangar, their boots striking the concrete in an unbroken rhythm. Jake was waiting, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes scanning each face as they came in. He didn't ask for a debrief right there. That would come later, behind closed doors, when the details could be dissected without an audience. For now, he just nodded once at Sarah. Not approval, exactly. Something heavier. They secured weapons, stowed gear, and filed out toward the barracks. The others peeled off one by one, heading for showers, bunks, or the mess hall. Sarah found herself walking back toward the quiet. She ended up on the roof again. The wind was stronger tonight, carrying the metallic tang of the airfield. Above her, the stars were faint behind thin, high clouds, but they were there. She sat on the ledge, hands resting loosely on her knees. Listening to the emptiness, she didn't hear Jake approach, but she felt the shift in the air when he stepped up beside her. "Solid work today," he said. She didn't look over. It held together. It held because you held it. She let the words sit for a moment before answering. "You know, that's not always going to happen," he nodded. "I know, but that's not the point. The point is leading them like it will, every time." For a while, neither of them spoke. The hum of distant generators was the only sound. "When we were pinned down in Cunard," she said finally, "I used to think the hardest part was keeping them alive long enough for help to get there. I was wrong. The hardest part was knowing some wouldn't make it and still doing the work anyway." Jake's voice was low. "You figured out what a lot of people never do." She glanced at him. "What's that?" "That leadership isn't about what happens when it's easy. It's about what you decide when you've already lost something." The wind picked up, tugging at her hair. She thought of the convoy today. The fog, the glint of the IED, the split-second choices, and she thought of how easily it could have tipped the other way. "I used to think carrying the names would break me," she said. "Now I think maybe they keep me standing." Jake didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "That's why Rodriguez was right about you." She didn't ask how he knew what Rodriguez had said. Some promises carried their own weight across years and witnesses. They stood there a while longer, looking out over the darkened airfield until the cold finally pressed deep enough to push them back inside. Later, in the quiet of her bunk, Sarah lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. She thought of the coordinates on her skin, the faces behind each name, and the squad now sleeping under the same roof. She thought about the fact that she couldn't save everyone, and that tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that, she'd be asked to try again anyway. And maybe that was the point, because sometimes dignity didn't speak. It didn't shout or demand recognition. It just acted, and it kept acting, no matter how heavy the names became.